Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure some of you guys are probably joining from the combine, but yeah, just wanted to get everybody together again, do a monthly, meeting and look at some of the forecasts where things are shaping up as we head into fall, as we head into some wheat planting, and then as we kind of forecast into the future and what some of these weather patterns are going to bring us. And so, what I would do is encourage everybody on the call. If you can, ask some questions. Right, Brian's an open book. We'll get him on here answering some questions, going through his forecast, and looking at some of these long terms. Next month, really the next 2 months, we'll probably have some additional content around PRF as we head into renewal season for that. But with that, I will turn this over to Brian.
All right, Scotty, thank you very much for having me on today, and got some good stuff to share with you folks today as well. So I'm hoping that a lot of the stuff that I share today will not only be timely for you, but also be informative as we go through that transitional season, as we always do this time of year. A lot of folks obviously still doing harvest. Some are trying to get wheat in the ground, and the weather pattern that's headed our way over the next week or so looks increasingly active. I'm going to let this cycle through a couple of times here because it's going to show how active the weather pattern is going to generally get here across the western United States. So I'm going to come up to the end of it here, then we're going to reset, and I'll walk you through it. And the first image that's going to pop up here cycling again is going to be the upper pattern for this evening. And what you'll see is a big storm moving through Nevada, Utah, on up into Montana, another storm coming down through California. That one has a chance to make its way far enough south through the Four Corners by late week and into the weekend to bring some beneficial moisture region wide. And then we kind of go back to a ridge of high pressure here across the western United States as we wrap up September, where there will likely be some heat again. So a couple of things right away with this pattern. Is there any cold air with this pattern? No, there's not. All that air is coming in from the Pacific. There's nothing that's really going to come down that's going to provide a significant cool down. And by significant, I mean I'm talking about like freeze or frost potential. I do not see that at all in this pattern. It's going to have to change quite a bit for that to be on the table. The other thing that I do see with this pattern is just simply becoming more active. I know there were some scattered showers and storms last night across parts of western Kansas. As this piece of energy comes out tomorrow, there will be another round come eastward out of Colorado, and then the secondary and trailing round comes through here late week, and especially as we head toward the weekend. So if nothing else, and this is always the trick, nobody's going to get exactly what they want out of any given pattern. And this pattern is no exception. But this pattern, if nothing else, is going to produce some of the better, more widespread rain chances that we have seen in quite some time. As that trailing piece of energy comes through the Four Corners by late Friday and through the weekend, the devil will always be in the details about how far north the main band sets up or how far south, because to be honest with you, I've seen computer model information that's still a little bit all over the board with that. So we're going to have to keep a close watch on that to see, kind of how the transition takes place with it as it makes its way through. Bottom line, though, I think anywhere here shaded in green has a real good opportunity to see precipitation anomalies in the form of rain that are going to be above average. So again, the farther southeast you go, look at that brown there across far southeast Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and down on the Gulf Coast. These storm systems that are coming through in the near term are simply coming through too far to the northwest to really bring a lot of beneficial moisture in that part of the world. But across most of Kansas, certainly all of Nebraska, I think we have a good opportunity to see some rain. And some folks are likely going to score some pretty healthy rain from some of the showers and storms that actually move through with this pattern. So overall, as I said, maybe not an ideal pattern for everybody, but it's certainly a lot better than what we've seen around here lately, and I know a lot of us will certainly take that. This kind of owes to what I was saying about the lack of cold air with this pattern that's coming through. These are the forecast temperature anomalies from this evening through the 23rd of September. So really spanning over the next week. And you can see right up the midsection of the country, there is no cold air to worry about there at all. Many areas running a good 5 to as much as 10 degrees above average. And this is factoring in daytime highs and nighttime lows. And this just simply means there's just not a whole lot of cool air at all with the pattern. Cooler, perhaps, as these systems come through, but far from cold, especially for this time of year. If we look beyond that at the following 7 days, this takes you from the 23rd through the 30th. You see some of these anomalies have come down quite a bit, so maybe not quite as much above average temperature-wise, but we're still looking at numbers on the order of about 2 to 6 degrees above where we should be for this time of year. So again, maybe cut those anomalies in half compared to what we're going to see at least over the next 7 days or so. So still warmer than average, wetter than average in the forecast for many of us, but as I said, likely not for everybody. So that's kind of what we're looking at over the next couple of weeks or so. Let's look a little bit beyond that, and actually a lot beyond that, because the main focus in terms of the long-range outlook is going to continue to be with what happens with our developing La Nina. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies that are across the globe, and the blue that you're seeing there off the west coast of South America, that is our developing La Nina. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, La Nina simply means the equatorial Pacific Ocean is running cooler than average. And that's certainly what we've got right there. We've got some warm water pulled up off the west coast of North America, eastward of Japan. We've got cool water coming down from the Bering Sea. And where you're seeing the temperature gradient there across the North Pacific, really northeast of Japan, extending through the Aleutian Islands, that temperature gradient between the cooler water to the north and the warmer water to the south is going to fuel a strong jet stream coming in from the Pacific. So that's one of the main reasons we're just not seeing a whole lot of cool air yet. A lot of what comes in is being flooded from the Pacific and helping to keep things fairly warm. And that doesn't look like it's going to be changing at least anytime soon. So I know a lot of us still have some work to get done. We're not looking for that frost or freeze just yet. And I don't think that that's on the table, at least in the near term, for the reasons I mentioned computer model wise, but also from what I'm seeing here across the North Pacific as far as sea surface temperatures go. The official NOAA, or Climate Prediction Center, outlook, this was just issued the other day, still forecasts anywhere from a 70 to an 80% probability that La Nina is going to exist by late this month, October, November, and really linger through December, January, February, and possibly January, February, March. Now, a little bit of history with this. La Ninas almost always peak during the heart of the winter, and then they show themselves out usually by late January, February, and certainly by March. I'm not saying that this one can't be different, but with the way things are stacked right now, I don't see any reason to really believe otherwise at this time. The other thing that I'm watching is once you get out there into the spring, seasonal change, especially March, April, May, you see that there's about a 60% probability of neutral conditions taking place right there. Normally that's good news, okay? But the overall state of the Pacific Ocean is still cold. Even if we see La Nina leave, the overall state, the PDO, is still going to be cold. So while I would love to see La Nina completely gone by that time frame, I'm always kind of looking behind over my shoulder. The fact that that PDO remains cold, could that create the La Nina impact to linger a little bit longer than it otherwise would? That's the question I'm going to resolve in the coming months. The other question is you see the red bars starting to tick up right there, especially by April, May, June. There is some computer model information out there that is suggesting we could pivot here from a La Nina to an El Nino, much like what we did in 2023. So I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying that there's some information out there that I'm looking at that's at least going to bear watching in the coming months. But I certainly think in the near term that, we're probably going to see this La Nina materialize. Maybe not necessarily in a strong event, but probably in a weak to moderate type of category that's still going to have some impacts for a lot of us. The other thing that I look for, not just in the oceans, but also the atmospheres, they have to be talking to each other. They have to work together. And one of the ways that we measure that is with the SOI. It's called the Southern Oscillation Index. It's simply a measure of air pressure differences between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. When it's positive, La Nina is working. When it's negative, El Nino is working. So if you look back into, on the left side of the graph here, back into the summer of 22, we had La Nina firmly in place. We killed it there in the spring of 23, which is a big reason why a lot of us got a lot of rain and a lot of severe weather. And then we kind of bounced around a weak, kind of non-traditional El Nino last winter, and even into early spring before we kind of come back to neutral. And then here recently on the far right side of the graph, you see that line coming up toward positive. That's a reflection of that cool water that's out there along the equator in the ENSO region, where the atmosphere and the ocean are trying to get together and make this La Nina actually work. So those are two things that I watch in tandem to see kind of exactly where we are, and it's also a good measure of how strong and persistent the La Nina episode is going to be. We're just getting started with this, so we're going to have to babysit it over the next several months and see where we go. The computer model information, at least through the end of this month, is really not robust at all with the La Nina formation. You see all of those gray bars represent different computer models and their forecasts for the month of September, and all of those gray bars are to the right of that blue dashed line, which would technically be La Nina threshold, all right? After we get past September, you can see what happens there in November. We've got a few computer models that are on board, taking us toward weak to moderate La Nina. NOAA's model is the most aggressive. It has been the most aggressive. However, it has also been the most overzealous or incorrect with this transition to a La Nina episode. So I'm not saying that it can't correct itself and become more correct going forward. I'm just simply saying it's been the most inaccurate. The one model that has been the most accurate, I should say two of them, is the BOM, that's the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, and also the ECMWF, that's the Euro model. I think right now the Euro model may be a little bit too weak with its forecast for November. But even if we look into go to January, both the BOM and the Euro model basically say, yeah, the ocean water out there is cooler than average, but we're technically not in La Nina. The Canadian model, that's the CANSIPS, that's number 2. NOAA and the UKMO, or all three have us in La Nina territory. So the main thing that I think is important here is we're working our way toward La Nina right now. The ocean, the background state of the PDO is already cold, all right? And when the PDO is cold, that usually helps to facilitate the development of La Nina episodes, which is kind of like where we're going right now. I still think there are some questions that we have to resolve on the strength of this La Nina episode that's coming up. I think a weak episode is definitely on the table. Could we push it to a moderate strength? It's possible, but I think a real strong episode right now is not on the table. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it's probably the least likely out of the scenarios that we have going forward. But it's still going to have impacts because that's what La Nina and El Niños do. The weather patterns that prevail with El Nino are on top, which we are not going to see this upcoming winter. The typical La Nina pattern is down here on the bottom. I'm firmly in the camp that that's a very similar weather pattern that we're likely going to see, where we have a real strong jet stream coming up over the North Pacific, dropping down through the northern Rockies and the upper Midwest. And what this does is it kind of splits Kansas really in two, to be honest. The farther southwest you go, you're likely to be warmer than average, drier than average, and windier than average. The farther east and northeast you go, it's at least a better opportunity to have at least average moisture in those coming months, because you're just in a better position to benefit from the storm track. That is the prevailing historical trend when La Ninas are present. Every La Nina is different, and we have to do some work to see how this thing shows itself in the coming months to see inevitably how things are going to play out. But I definitely think a La Nina-like pattern is going to be the thing that we're going to have to contend with. A big reason why La Ninas are bad in the southwest part of the United States is up on top right there. You see those 3 arrows right over the Pacific Ocean tidal? That is indication of sinking air. And when you have sinking air off the Baja of California, out there in the equatorial Pacific, you basically have no southern branch of the jet stream. All of your energy is confined to that one strong northern branch. So if you're not in that storm track, you're usually left high, dry, and windy. Okay? With an El Nino episode, there is rising motion in that area. It helps to facilitate a southern branch of the jet stream. And if nothing else, your odds of getting better moisture are better. We are not going to have that. We are firmly going to be in the La Nina camp, in my opinion here. So with that in mind, let's see what our computer models are suggesting. This is the Euro seasonal model precipitation anomaly forecast for October. Wherever you're seeing brown, that just simply means the odds of it being drier than average are being viewed by the model as the most correct. That doesn't mean that you're going to get completely shut out or that there aren't going to be storms coming through. It just simply means that the chances of it being drier than average are better right now. And you can see basically all of Kansas is firmly in the brown right there for October. If we look at November, very much the same story. But the thing that I'm noticing here is you see all the green from the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies, the Upper Midwest. That's the area that this model is suggesting has the best shot to be wetter than average because it's being influenced by that northern storm track. As I showed you, the farther south and southwest you go, it's not a good scenario. The same thing could be said if you have interest down along the Gulf Coast or in the southeast. The farther north you go, the better opportunity you have to see better moisture. And across Kansas, at least through December, it's just mostly below average in terms of moisture the way we see it right now. December, the model is suggesting we might get a little bit of a break with some storms coming down from the northern Rockies. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But the theme here, even as we go into January, still shows up that the southwest certainly looks drier than average. The farther north and northeast you go, you can see we get into the white in northeast Kansas. We certainly go into the green and there in the Corn Belt. That's for January. The other thing that I would think is important here is that with all of the green up here across southern Canada and the northern Rockies, there is going to be some snowpack building up there. And with some snowpack, there will be bouts of cold air that come down. That is historically the case with La Nina. La Nina temperature trends during the course of the fall, winter, and spring can be highly variable, meaning we have a real warm one day and crash the next. So I think that's certainly on the table to be prepared for, especially as we get deeper into the winter. If we look at February, you see that sect of really the western 2/3 of Kansas, eastern Colorado, drier than average down in the panhandles, but the farther east you go, especially once you get east I-35, that's where historically La Ninas will benefit the most. You get east of I-35, you hit the better moisture, the storm comes together better, and that's where you have a better shot to see the better moisture in terms of the pattern. If we look at March, very much the same story. Eastern Kansas, wetter than average. Eastern Oklahoma, you go just west of there, it shows up drier than average. I'm not really sure why that wet is showing up there in eastern Colorado, but it's possible we get better moisture this way, and then things come together a little bit better the farther east you go. But right now, that's what the Euro seasonal model is showing. And it is one of the weaker models right now in terms of the strength of La Nina. So if you strengthen the La Nina, you usually will strengthen the impact. So let's look at NOAA's model here, which is the most aggressive with it in forecasting the La Nina episode, and see what it says. Well, for October, it's not a whole lot different than what the Euro model was showing. A lot of brown on the map there, drier than average, which is typically the case for Octobers with the La Nina. All right, that's very typical. If we look at November, pretty much the same story in terms of dryness. Maybe not to the extent that it was in October, but you still get the idea. And the thing to watch for is in December, you could see the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies getting active as that La Nina storm track really gets going. Eastern Colorado, Western Kansas, and southwestward, as well as southeastward, likely drier than average, but you can see the white shading there for the eastern, pretty much half of Kansas, that kind of lessens that dry signal. For January, it completely gets out. You see drier than average, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, Southwest Texas. But some of that energy will likely be coming down from the Northern Rockies and could possibly not only provide for better chances for some snow, but also more frequent colder shots coming down from the north. And I know a lot of us don't think a January and February moisture is great, but I would love to be able to see some snow on the ground during those months. That would certainly be beneficial to us. In February, this looks very much like the Euro did. Dry western Kansas, southwest Nebraska, most of eastern Colorado, down through New Mexico, West Texas, Arizona. The farther north and northeast you go, obviously that dry signal is noticeably less. In March, very similar to what the Euro was showing too, minus the exception of the drier than average there in eastern Colorado. So no huge surprise there. And then for April, we still see a similar flavor here. And I will say, by this time, the La Nina should be getting out of the way. Historically speaking, and if this ends up being just a weak event, it would certainly be getting out of the way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't still be some La Nina-like impacts hanging on, because as I've said frequently, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the PDO, is still cool. Okay, so bottom line, some takeaways from this is certainly the farther east and northeast you go, the better prospects you're going to have to see some frequent moisture this winter, fall, winter, and even into spring. The farther west and southwest you go, especially after we get out of September, I think your opportunity for moisture is going to be noticeably less. And that's also here in the IRI multi-model. I just grabbed this today. This is a fresh update. It's forecast for October, November, December. You can see drier than average signal, very stout there in the darker orange across southeast Colorado, most of western Kansas. And then as we head into December, January, February, that dry signal really gets scaled back over to the Four Corners states. A little bit of that bleeds into western half of Kansas. But the farther east you go, it really lessens up, or lightens up, I should say. And then I took it one more step here for Jan, Feb, and March. Again, having the core of that dry signal really over the southwest part of the country, because the storm track will be coming in from the north, Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, and then it drops down into the upper Midwest and the Corn Belt. If you are southwest of that storm track, that's what's being reflected there in terms of that dry signal. So all three of these models generally have the same idea. They should, because they're all forecasting at least a La Nina of some strength going forward. I think, though, it just really depends on how the storm track evolves during the fall and winter as to who gets what. But I would still say, and I will say this, till I'm blue in the face, the farther west and southwest you live, the more stout that dry signal is going to be. The more I would be prepared for the warmer than average, the very volatile temperature changes with cold fronts coming through, more wind, and that type of thing. So I'm very hopeful that we can at least get some moisture in the ground here with these events that are coming forward, so folks can get some wheat in, get it planted, get it up, so we don't have a bunch of bare ground out there when some of the wind events actually start to come through with the seasonal change as we get through the fall. So with that in mind, if you guys have questions, please feel free to fire away.
Yeah, feel free to type any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A there. But one of them that I got in text was you kind of started off, talked about freeze, looking like that would probably be pushed later into the fall. Do you see some sort of shift there that kind of indicates, okay, it's probably going to get real cold in a certain time frame?
Getting real cold sometime this fall?
Yeah, as you kind of look at some of that, as it's obviously looking warmer now, the question was around when are we kind of thinking freeze potential?
Well, I mean, any individual event could trigger something, but in terms of the pattern being conducive to cold weather, that is not present at all right now. And it owes to what I was saying about our jet stream right now is going to be roaring in off the Pacific, and that Pacific air is still mild. And we've been warmer than average in many places for a while now. I don't see that changing a great deal. However, historically speaking, during La Ninas, when that first cold front comes through, it is usually a bear. And by a bear, I mean we may go from 85, 90 one day to upper 20s the next. We can have that kind of a shift during La Nina falls when that happens. So I don't see anything like that coming, at least for the next 2 weeks. And I would say probably as we even get deeper into October. Historically speaking, that big one usually will come in November. But we'll just have to see how that plays out. I don't see anything on the table, though, in the near term.
I'll have to make sure I winterize my boat.
Yeah.
But, and then the other part, I'm sitting here with somebody, and the question was a little bit, as we go into that Jan through March La Nina, how has that kind of shifted from maybe where we thought this could have gone? It sounded like it could have been a little more dramatic La Nina a couple months back. Mm-hmm. Is it still just weakening, or are we kind of on pace, or what's your thoughts around that?
It's just like what I said. NOAA's model was the most aggressive with it. Okay. So, and it was overdoing it. The fact that we have been more, I guess, not necessarily a pause on it per se, but it's developed more slowly has actually been a good thing, believe it or not, because I think had we gone full, real strong La Nina, like NOAA's model was suggesting, that we would have seen more wind right now. We would have been drier than what we've had right now. We wouldn't have some of these storms coming in from the Pacific like what we have right now to at least put moisture chances on the table. So that's been a good thing. However, the La Nina development is continuing. So that's what I was saying. Like I firmly believe at minimum, we're going to have a weak event. there's a slight window of opportunity for that to become stronger, but it has everything to do with how the trade winds are behaving in the Pacific Ocean. And they've really only gotten their act together during the past month. So if they weaken, which I watch these things every day, if they weaken, that would suggest to me that this La Nina event is only going to be on the weaker side of things and will probably end sooner. If those trade winds strengthen and are more persistent, we're going to have a stronger event. So that's something that is always determined once we get deeper into the seasonal change as the seasons kind of change and balance out a little bit.
Okay. And so the last one is, obviously we looked and looked through to March as we start thinking about 25 corn plantings, start thinking about those things, which are a long ways away. Do you think that we're opened up to potentially having some decent moisture, as we head into next spring? I mean, is the potential there, or
as long as we can get, if this event is not strong, and it stays weak and pretty short-lived, there's an opportunity for us as we get into springtime, and by spring I'm talking March, April, May, to actually get a seasonal transition without El Nino or La Nina being in play. And that would probably be the best case scenario for everybody, because if you have a La Nina, everybody west and southwest have problems. If you have an El Nino, areas farther east and northeast have problems. So if we don't have either one of those working for us and we can actually get somewhat of a quote unquote normal seasonal change, I think it's on the table to have some moisture. The one caveat to that is and I do see in some of the models that we pivot out of a La Nina to an El Nino, much like what we did in 23. Now, again, 23 was great for some, but it was terrible for others for a whole host of reasons. So when you pivot from one extreme to the other there, you're always going to have problems that you're going to have to worry about. I would love for us to not have either one of those things in place and actually have a quote unquote normal spring. It'll get obviously more determined as we go forward in the next several months. But right now, I think West and Southwest Kansas are probably at most risk to have that dry, windy, warmer than average type setup linger because of the La Nina, just simply because that's what history has done. And the computer model information shows that. So I know it's early to worry about spring. And to be honest with you, we're going to have to wait to see kind of how that's going to play out.
Right on. Well, Brian, I appreciate you jumping on here, and look forward to a chance to have a live meeting with you next month. And everybody else that was on, thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to somebody at Producer Ag. Thank you.